Yes, sir, we can start.
Okay. So, good evening, all. As you all know, this is the introductory class for our new neurosurgery course, which we are starting at Surge Test. So, to start with, I'll like to thank Vinayak and his Surge Test team for making this course feasible. And I have chosen this topic of awake craniotomy for this first session. This is because I wanted to introduce you to the whole new world of neurosurgery and how interesting it is, and what all new possibilities you can see in neurosurgery. And apart from that, it is a very important topic for NEET SS and other entrance examinations. You could expect around 3 to 4 MCQs from this particular topic. And over in this topic also, you'll see how neurosurgeons actually go about planning a particular surgery, how we carry on with intricate procedure of keeping the patient awake while doing the surgery, and while that you are observing the patient for any neurological deficit. So a lot of neurology also you'll come to learn in this particular session. So we'll start with the session now. I hope I'm audible and visible to all the all the people, and the presentation is also visible. If there is any issue, you can just raise your hand, or you can just post it in the chat. So as you can see, this is at my hospital. We are doing a awake craniotomy where the anesthetist is speaking to the patient, and he is just mildly sedated. There is no intubation. He's just on nasal prongs. Oxygen is being given. So what is actually awake craniotomy? So in awake craniotomy, you keep the patient awake. The patient is spontaneously breathing. He is not paralyzed. He is able to move, and he is not intubated. So why do we do awake craniotomy? So as you know that we have two kinds of areas in brain. We have eloquent areas, and we have non-eloquent areas. So when you are excising a non-eloquent area, you don't expect any deficit in the patient. The patient will be totally normal. His speech will be normal. His movements will be normal. His thought process will be normal after the surgery. So we don't have any problem excising such kind of an area. But if you touch the eloquent area, if you excise the eloquent area, patient will come out with a lot of deficits. He will have hemiplegia. He will have speech deficits. He will have memory deficits. So to avoid all this, this particular concept of awake craniotomy has come into picture. Now, why awake craniotomy is important, I'll tell you. Now, you can see in this particular picture, this particular gentleman is playing a guitar. He is a musician. He's playing guitar. He's a musician, and he wanted his sense of perceiving music and playing music to be preserved. So he wanted that while doing the surgery, he should be playing his guitar, and his sensations and his technique all should be intact. So that is what the advantage is, that the surgeon has to be very careful whenever there is any deficit which is starting off due to the surgery. He will stop there. He'll stop his excision over there. Now, how did the awake craniotomy process start? What is the history of awake craniotomy? So in the prehistoric times, there are certain skulls which we have retrieved, which show that there have been defects in the skulls, which suggest that the individual was live when that skull defect was created, because the margins of it were slanting. So that suggests that in prehistoric times, in case of, let's say, head injury where the patient is having EDH, there was certain scientific evidence that they used to create a hole in the skull and to evacuate the hematoma. So in medieval period also, we had certain frontal craniotomies being done. where a person who was perceived to be going mad, his frontal lobe used to be damaged, so that he could improve out of his neurological deficit. So that is about the history and evolution of awake craniotomy. Now coming about how did actually the techniques evolve? How did the anesthesia of awake craniotomy evolve? So you could expect 2 to 3 MCQs from this particular slide. First of all, in 1874, first brain mapping was done by R. Barthlow. He got a patient who had his skull exposed, his cranium was exposed. So he got an opportunity to stimulate the brain and observe what area of brain is stimulating, what kind of function, or what kind of function is being inhibited by stimulation of that particular area. So he created on this basis first brain mapping. So it was R. Barthlow. Then coming to the local anesthesia while the electrical stimulation is being applied. So obviously when you are touching dura, the patient will feel pain because dura is a pain sensitive structure. So in this case, Horsley was the first to actually give local anesthesia while doing such stimulations. Then came Davidoff in 1934. He combined local anesthesia with mild sedation so that patient should not feel the anxiety of the whole process. Then came in 1937 Penfield and Baldry. So this was a very landmark findings. Penfield actually told, and he actually mapped human body over the hemisphere, and he gave it a form of homunculus. So homunculus was actually the caricature of a human being based on the size of representation over the cortex. So actually legs and the trunk were acquiring a small area, and hand, face, and tongue, they were actually taking up a larger area in the representation in the cortex. So that's why this caricature, you must have seen the homunculus caricature. It is quite deformed. It has got a very, very big face and very big hands, but small arms, trunks, and legs. So that all is based on the representation of human body in the cortex. Now coming on to who introduced neuroleptoanesthesia. So this is a kind of anesthesia where patient is not able to feel pain, and he is also not able to feel any anxiety, and you are able to also talk to the patient. You are able to get the responses out from the patient. So patient is not totally asleep. So this neuroleptoanesthesia was brought by Castro and Mundelier. So these are mainly these particular scientists, and these particular discoveries are important for neuroanesthetists, not for neurosurgeons. So I'll just zoom through this particular slide. The fentanyl and droperidol was brought by Archer, and use of propofol in neurosurgery was brought by Silbergeld. Now, what all we'll be covering in this particular presentation, awake craniotomy importances, what are the advantages, what areas are indicated for awake surgery, and what are the contraindications, complications, and what kind of patients should go for awake surgery, what is the dominant versus non-dominant hemisphere, whom should you take. So all these questions will be answered in this presentations, and any of these slides can come as MCQs in your examinations, especially those who are preparing for larger central institutes like AIIMS and JIPMER. You could expect a whole lot of questions from this particular topic. Now, this slide shows you the comprehensive process, what we do and why we want to do a awake craniotomy. So first of all, when we do patient's imaging, supposedly we found a glioma, which is a left frontal glioma. Now, this particular glioma is in the frontal lobe, and it is nearby the speech area. So, so left is the dominant lobe, and speech area is located somewhere around here. Okay, so now I don't want my patient to have deficit. So that's why I would decide to do a awake craniotomy while observing speech of the patient. And whenever I see that patient is starting to get deficit, I stop my resection, because my motive is to resect this particular tumor, but not as much that patient loses his whole speech. So maybe if as and when I am coming to this speech area, I will stop short of excising the speech area, so that patient at least goes with the speech. Remaining tumor, even if it is left, I can deal it with the radiotherapy, right? So when you open the dura, this is how the area surgical field looks like. So where is the tumor and what is the normal cortex? It is very difficult to differentiate, because in case of low grade gliomas, they appear almost like the normal brain. It is very much different from the regular abdomen surgeries, where you can actually see the tumor and it is very clear to identify the tumor. But in brain, the situation is different. The tumor is difficult to identify for less experienced eyes. Only very experienced people can actually identify a tumor by its margins. So that's why you need awake craniotomy. When I'll start the surgery, let's say I'm starting the surgery on this patient, I will stimulate this area, I'll stimulate this area, I'll stimulate this area, I'll stimulate this area. So on stimulating this area, I found that patient is developing speech deficit. So I'll form the boundaries. Okay, this is my safe zone. So this is where I am going to excise. So that's how you carry forward. So when I'll carry on with my surgery, I'll excise the whole tumor out while not touching the areas which were eloquent, which were giving me deficit. So I'll leave all those areas. So this is then I will check later with a delta ALA angiography. So in this, I will see that how much tumor is actually left. So these are the areas which are left. So I can excise more. So this is the final picture after the surgery. The tumor is gone. So tumor which was here has gone. It has been excised. Now, what is the importance of awake craniotomy? So when we are talking about gliomas, so gliomas actually extend beyond the visible margins and beyond the margins which are being shown by MRI FLAIR images. So in coming days in this particular course, I will be telling you each and everything about MRI, because MRI forms a very important part in neurosurgery, and a lot of questions you can expect from MRI, and how to interpret the images, what are the different kinds of MRI. So in these gliomas, as MRI FLAIR images actually show as hyper intense images, hyper intense, they show up as bright. So these bright images, a bright particular area of tumor, actually what MRI is showing, beyond that 20 millimeter, beyond that particular area, tumor cells are extending. So my motive to make the patient disease free is to excise the tumor and excise the 20 millimeter margin of the tumor. So that is my sole purpose. So in case the patient, if he is under full general anesthesia, I would not be able to take a risk of excising 20 millimeter because of the fear of deficit. So that's why what I do is I will keep the patient awake. I will keep the patient awake. So by keeping the patient awake, I will be able to take risk. I will be able to observe the patient, what particular excision is actually creating deficit, and wherever the deficit is created, so I will stop short of that particular site and I'll be able to excise more. So that is the importance of awake craniotomy, that you are able to excise more because you are observing the patient. Now, this is another important point. These all points are like crux of neurosurgery in current times. All the glioma resections, these points will be straight away asked in your MCQs. Okay. So what it was found was that better extent of resection by using intraoperative mapping improved outcomes in both low and high grade gliomas. So if you want to do intraoperative mapping, you need to keep the patient awake. Why? Because if you want to stimulate the brain, you need to see the response. If you are stimulating the brain, whether the patient is having a speech arrest, so you want to observe that. So that's why you want to keep the patient awake. So that is where the importance of awake craniotomy lies. Now, what happens is if I keep the patient awake and if I remove more amount of tumor than I can remove under general anesthesia, what I tend to do is I do a supratotal removal. So supratotal removal is very beneficial for me because I do more than what is being showed in the MRI FLAIR based image. And rather than doing just the lesion excision, rather than just doing the lesionectomy, I am doing a supratotal removal. So this is very much beneficial for the patients. So it is so much beneficial that the benefits actually exceed the benefits of operating on a young individual, operating on a patient with better Karnofsky score, operating on a patient with having lesser tumor volume. Even better than that, if you are operating on a patient with supratotal resection, it is better, right? Now, what are the advantages of awake craniotomy? So when the patient is awake, you are able to assess visuospatial awareness, you are able to assess language, you are able to assess sensation. They require awake state. They are subjective things. You need to see the patient, you need to observe, you need to talk to the patient to assess these particular deficits. Awake state requires a lower current amplitude relative to a sleep mapping. So when you are stimulating, you want to map the particular cortical area, you want to map the tumor area. So you are stimulating at multiple locations. So those stimulations will require lower current amplitude. So lower current amplitude, if you are using to stimulate the brain, what happens is that you will have lesser intraoperative seizure risk. Okay, you tend to get intraoperative seizure also because you are operating on brain is a organism which is electrically stimulated. So there are signals, electrical signals which are flowing in your brain. So if you meddle with the electrical signals of the brain, you can get intraoperative seizures. So do we have any questions from the audience? I see somebody has raised their hands. If you want, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I guess nobody wants to ask a question. It's okay. So I'll carry on. So if you are having a low amplitude stimulation while doing the surgery, as I explained, so it improves the spatial fidelity. What does spatial fidelity means? That if I want to stimulate a particular area of brain, if I initially when the patient was under GA, supposingly he was under GA, I was using a 2 milliampere current. So 2 milliampere current was a high current and it was stimulating a particular brain area. So 2 milliampere current will actually tell me that within 2 centimeters, somewhere the area is, somewhere the functional area is. So what happens in awake surgery is that you are able to stimulate within, let's say, 0.2 milliampere current. So 0.2 milliampere current will tell you that the particular area which can create deficit is within 0.2 centimeters of the particular stimulation. So it will improve your spatial fidelity. You will be able to do better precise localization, better precise excision, and you will there is a less chance that you will either go more into the functional area, or you will just be so short of the functional area that you will unnecessarily leave the tumor in the tumor field. Okay. Then it allows testing of the volitional aspect of the movement, so willful aspect of the movement. So let's say a patient is able to move his hands and feet, but whether there is will or not, so that you can test only and only if you are keeping the patient awake during the surgery. So volitional aspect you can test. So this will test your supplementary motor area and the parietal regions in these cases. Okay. And then provide continuous online monitoring of higher order functions like attention, judgment, and mentalizing. So obviously, you know that if a patient is awake, I cannot assess all these things, whether patient is retaining his attention during the surgery, or his judgment, his executive decision making, his memory, his speech. So all these also require awake craniotomy. Now, what are the areas which are indicated for the awake craniotomy? What kind of brain areas? If your tumor is in these areas, you should always prefer awake surgery. So, if it is language area, you should prefer awake surgery. Then, if it is lateral parietal lobe, where you can develop Gerstmann syndrome, I'll tell you what Gerstmann syndrome is in coming classes. So you can have acalculia, agraphia. Okay, you will not be able to calculate, you will not be able to differentiate between your left side and your right side. So all these can happen if you injure the left parietal lobe. So if the tumor is in left parietal lobe, it is very important, you should go for a awake surgery. Then lesions adjacent to the arcuate fibers. So arcuate fibers are the ones which carry the speech, which carry speech from Broca's area to Wernicke's area. I think everybody must be aware about the Broca's and the Wernicke's area. Then the lesions adjacent to the motor cortex. So if the lesion is very near to the motor cortex, near the central sulcus, you can create a hemiplegic post-operative defect if you are not able to observe the patient during the surgery. So that's why also in the tumors near motor cortex, you need awake surgery. Now, what kind of lesions do you do awake surgery for? So you can do awake surgery for epilepsy surgery. You can do for glioma, meningioma, tuberculoma, whatever the lesion is. If it is in the eloquent areas, what I just told you, like motor cortex, your speech area, your arcuate fasciculus, any lesions near those areas which are less vascular, and you are expecting not too much amount of bleeding, you can go for those kind of lesions with the awake surgery. Then you can go for deep brain stimulation. Deep brain stimulation is another very interesting area of neurosurgery, where you actually implant electrodes in the brain. So it is like science fiction. You actually go and implant electrodes inside the brain. And it is right now there are 4 or 5 indications which are approved where you do electrode implantation in the brain. So in those surgeries also, it is good to have a patient awake. Then if you are doing a stereotactic brain biopsy, so if there is etiology which is deep inside the brain where you don't know what it is, whether I should excise or whether I should not excise, so you can initially start with a stereotactic biopsy. And stereotactic biopsy, if the patient is awake and the area is very eloquent, you can go for awake surgery. Then going for pallidotomy, thalamotomy, and ventriculostomy. So pallidotomy is excising globus pallidus. So that is done for, let's say, tremors. Patient is having essential tremors. Patient is having neuropathic pain which has not been relieved by any other treatment. So in all those cases, you can do a pallidotomy, thalamotomy, and ventriculostomy is your lateral ventricles. If you are inserting a drain to drain the excessive CSF or excessive blood inside your ventricle, so that is called as ventriculostomy. So in those procedures also, you can choose to do a awake surgery. Now talking about resection of very small brain regions like cavernomas and hemangiomas. So these again, if they are located in the eloquent brain areas, you can choose to go for awake brain surgery. Now, how would you select a patient? What kind of patient is actually good for and actually fit for a awake brain surgery? You cannot take a child for awake brain surgery. He will cry his shit off and he will never listen to your commands. You will never be able to actually understand if he is having a deficit or he is just crying and if he is just afraid. So there are certain categories of patient you can take for awake surgery. So what are those? They are ASA grade 1 and 2 patients. So ASA grade 2 and 3 are contraindications for awake brain surgery. Patient should be alert. You cannot take a comatose patient to awake brain surgery. So patient should be emotionally stable. So let's say if there is a young girl, if there are any females, please pardon me. So there are certain females who are overtly reactive to even a small needle prick. So would they be able to bear this awake brain surgery? No. So you have to assess the patient beforehand pre-operatively whether the patient is emotionally stable or not, whether he will be able to cooperate with you for those 4, 5, 6 hours of the surgery being awake or not. You should assess the patient's motivation also, and then whether the patient is likely to cooperate in your surgery or not. So these are the points which tell you what kind of patients you need to select. And what is the age limit for awake craniotomy? Usually, as such, there is no defined age limit, but it has been mostly done in patients from 15 to 65 years of age. You can go for older age group also, but then their functional responses are usually low. So it is very difficult to assess the functional deficits in very old people. And very young people, what is the issue is that their cortex is very difficult to excite when if supposingly this is the lesion and you are stimulating at different places. They need a very high current, so they need currents, let's say, more than 8 milliampere. So these currents can actually induce epilepsy or seizure, the intraoperative seizure to the patient. So that's why what is children less than 7 years, awake craniotomy is not advisable. Now talking about contraindications of awake craniotomy. So in contraindications are that if the patient is having a power less than 3 by 5, that he is not able to lift his hand, lift his arm or lower limb against gravity. So if he is not able to lift against gravity, how would you be able to perceive what kind of input he is giving you, or let's say if he, whether he is having a deficit or not, because it will be barely observable. If his arm he is not able to move, it will be barely observable because people with power 2 by 5 are barely able to move. So those kind of patients who are having this much amount of deficit, they are not good candidates for awake craniotomy. They are already having so much deficit that even if you conserve, that not much benefit you will do to the patient. Then significant preoperative language deficit, more than 25% error rate. So significant language deficit are there. So let's say patient is having motor aphasia. You asked him a question and he is replying some gibberish. Okay. So no need to assess, no need to keep the patient awake if you're not able to assess the language deficit. Patient is having so much language deficit that you are not actually getting the feedback from the patient. Or if the patient is having sensory aphasia, the patient is not able to understand your commands. He will be on his own trip. He will be talking anything. You are asking one question, he is replying something else altogether. So though this kind of patient also is not an appropriate candidate for surgery, and it is a contraindication for the awake surgery. Now, a patient who is having poor cognitive function, his cognition is so low, he is mentally retarded totally. So in this kind of patient also, he will not be able to cooperate. You cannot expect him to cooperate with you. Same way, pediatric patient also, very less chance that they will cooperate with you during the surgery. So these are all contraindications. Then coming to the high vascular lesions. So if the blood loss itself is expected to be 1 or 2 liters, if you are operating in such kind of a patient, you will die with an MI during the surgery, seeing you run here and there for his blood. So obviously the high vascular lesions, you should not operate in awake craniotomy. Coming on to the anesthesia related risks. So these risks are very obvious. Everybody knows that if patient is having obstructive sleep apnea, his tongue is falling while patient is mildly sedated itself, and you are keeping him for awake craniotomy, suddenly his saturation drops. You would not have the opportunity to actually intubate the patient while his brain is open, right? So these kind of morbid obesity patient and obstructive sleep apnea patient are again contraindications for awake craniotomy. Now, what kind of complication you can expect during awake craniotomy? So they can be anesthesia related complication and surgery related complication. These are typical complications which usually happen in general anesthesia surgeries also, but specifically desaturation, hypoxia, and hypotension, nausea, vomiting, shivering. So these are the things which are unique to awake surgeries which can happen and which can obstruct your peaceful surgery, and there will be a lot of commotion in the operation theater, and in between you might have to halt your surgery and then intubate the patient and stabilize the patient and then resume with your surgery. So these kind of complications you should be ready to face. Now coming on to prevention and treatment of intraoperative seizure. So there have been many questions related to this in past exams also. So how, in case you get an intraoperative seizure, patient suddenly starts to seize, what will you do? So first of all, what kind of preoperative anticonvulsants and what are kind of intraoperative measures you will take? So anticonvulsants should be initiated at least 1 to 2 weeks in advance before you are taking the patient to surgery, and the effective blood concentrations should be ensured. It should not be that patient is spitting off his tablet and nobody knows that patient has not actually taken his anti-epileptic medications, because that is very risky and the patient can have intraoperative seizures. Now, intraoperative treatment of seizures is that you will, when if you are stimulating at multiple places with electric current. So, if the patient is having seizures, what you can do is you can reduce your current intensity. Okay. Then, if patient is persisting to have seizures, you can pour cold saline on the brain surface. So, this will help the convulsion go down, because the metabolic activity of the neurons which are causing the seizure will reduce. So the metabolic activity will reduce and this will halt the seizures. Then intraoperatively, you can ask for phenytoin levels. In case the patient is on phenytoin, you can ask for phenytoin levels. You can give small doses of propofol or midazolam to halt the seizures, so that patients, the seizures can be aborted. And since midazolam and propofol are short-acting drugs, so patient can be reawakened and the awake craniotomy continued. If convulsions are occurring very frequently during the surgery and you are not able to carry on with your surgery while the patient is awake, you can switch on to general anesthesia. Now I'll give you the picture of pre-operative planning. Now this pre-operative planning is not just specific to awake craniotomies. We do such kind of pre-operative planning, even the procedures which we operate through general anesthesia also. So you have to first determine which is the patient's dominant hemisphere. What are the functional areas which are at risk when you will be operating, when you are removing the tumor? What kind of functional areas are at risk? Whether he is at risk of losing his speech, whether he is at risk of losing his lower limb movements, whether he is at risk of losing his vision, or he is at risk of having a field defect. You have to tell and counsel the patient and family before itself. But how would you know? How would you know that which area is under a risk, where the tumor is? What are the functional areas? What are the eloquent areas nearby the tumor? So these are the techniques which will help you find out. So we'll go through these techniques one by one. Coming on to functional MRI. So functional MRI, you must have heard about MRI, but functional MRI is while the patient is performing certain tasks, whether it can be speech, whether it is finger tapping or lower limb movement, or maybe identifying a certain object, visualizing certain objects. So all these things, while the patient is inside the MRI scanner, the MRI will be able to detect the areas which are activated during that particular function. So how does MRI is able to do? So MRI is able to do because there is increased blood flow in a particular brain area whenever you are asking the patient to do that particular activity. So what happens is, when there is increase in the blood flow, there is increase in oxyhemoglobin, and there is decrease in deoxyhemoglobin and in that particular area. Now the deoxyhemoglobin is actually paramagnetic. It is paramagnetic. So if it is paramagnetic, the MRI is able to detect this particular change, and it is able to show in its T2 weighted images this particular change, and the area which was stimulated and was being tested will appear as bright, okay. So I will see an example. So this is the functional MRI. So here speech was tested. So you can see these many areas of brain were stimulated. But when we know that speech is a motor speech, when the patient is speaking, that particular area is in the frontal lobe of the left side. Okay, that is the Broca's speech area, which is coming as the largest representation. So we know that this is Broca's area and this is the tumor. So if I'm excising, I should approach the tumor maybe like this. But if I approach the tumor like this, I will actually damage the Broca's speech area. So this all kind of information we neurosurgeons consider before actually going in for surgery. So planning of the surgery is a big process. So because it is a life and death, a life ruining situation for the patient, if we intentionally actually spoil, damage his speech area, while we could have saved if we could have adopted a different approach. So that's why pre-operative evaluation of these function is very important. So let's say if it is finger tapping, so this is the area which got stimulated when finger was being tapped by the patient while doing the MRI. And let's say if he is listening, so these are the two areas which are stimulated when the patient is listening, right? Now, what are the uses of the functional MRI? So it following spatial and temporal patterns of neural plasticity to aid in the timing of the reoperation. So in case the patient is having a resurgery and you have excised a particular brain area, you will be able to assess that the function related to that brain area has been restored or not. So there is a phenomena called as neural plasticity. This is a MCQ. So neural plasticity is the phenomena by which if this is the area where you had excised the tumor, and this is the area where there are normal neurons still present. So the lost function of this particular brain area is taken by the brain area which is still intact. So this area here will take the function of the excised brain area. So this is called as neural plasticity. So why it is important is we know that brain cannot regenerate. There can be no regeneration of new neurons. Obviously, whatever brain function which is restored after excising a particular functional brain area, it happens by neural plasticity, right? As a screening tool to establish candidate regions of interest for a particular function. So as I told you, so you could know what functions can be involved if I do surgery on this patient. So I have to go back and tell the patient and the attendants and counsel them that, boss, you may lose this particular function if I do the surgery. Are you willing for it? So you have to go and counsel the patient. Then you can also know hemispheric dominance of the language function, where the language function is located, whether it is in the right hemisphere or the left hemisphere. So if I am operating on a tumor in left hemisphere, let's say left hemisphere or right hemisphere, okay, right or left. So if the tumor is in left hemisphere, so I should know whether the speech is also in the left hemisphere. So I'll be more cautious while excising this particular tumor, and I will rather go for a awake craniotomy in such a patient who is having speech area on his left side and tumor also on his left side, to provide some level of functional data in patient unable to undergo awake craniotomy. So if, if the patient is anyways not able to undergo awake craniotomy, if I am doing patient surgery under GA, at least some functional data pre-operatively I'll come to know. During the surgery, I will not get the feedback whether the patient's speech is getting affected or not. But under GA, I would avoid any of those area which were shown in my pre-operative MRI, functional MRI, that these area are speech areas. So I will not go near those areas. So that's how it works. Now talking about magnetoencephalography. So this is a very new upcoming investigation, which is still only present in one institute in India, that is Neurological Institute of India in Gurgaon. So this is magnetoencephalogram. You can see this machine. A patient is shown or given a particular task, whether it could be speech or some visual testing or spatial testing. And then we observe the magnetic fields which are produced by the electrical activity of the dendrites or electrical activity of the neurons. So those magnetic fields gives us a precise location of a particular brain area. So it's very similar to the MRI what we understood. The same way MRI is able to assess by the blood circulation increase, this particular investigation is able to assess by the magnetic fields. So that's why it is called as magnetoencephalography. It is like EEG. So EEG is electroencephalography. Magnetoencephalography is you look for magnetic impulses generated by your brain neurons. So it has got 100% negative predictive value. So you will be 100% sure that this is not speech area. So you are 100% sure. But if this is speech area or not, you are just 64% sure. So this is what magnetoencephalography tells you. So it is not routinely used yet. It is still a research tool and has not come in regular use because it is very, very costly. Now talking about transcranial magnetic stimulation. So these are all recent advances. This particular awake craniotomy chapter itself forms the part of recent advances in neurosurgery. So all those people who are preparing for AIMS and JIPMER and the institutes, they need to mug it up very well. Talking about transcranial magnetic stimulation, what you do in transcranial magnetic stimulation is you will have a magnetic stimulator which will generate a magnetic field which very localized to a particular brain area. The neurons there are stimulated and they send a signal, and you have let's say a electromyography lead implanted. You will be able to read that signal in your EMG, right? So that's how this particular thing works. Or you also will be, if this particular impulse is strong enough, you might also be able to perceive that particular signal as a twitch, okay, twitch of that muscle. So this is what is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Again, it is based on magnetic energy, and it is a recent technology for mapping the cortical function. So you map the cortical function, whether it is speech or whether it is your hand limb movements or your feet or ankle movements. It is a non-invasive technique. You don't have to put patient under sedation. You don't have to do any kind of pricks on the patient. It generates precise and local magnetic field. It induces an action potential in the small population of the neurons which are being tested. and then MRI data can be co-registered with the transcranial magnetic stimulation software. So actually the area which is being stimulated, that can be shown in your MRI, which areas are being stimulated. So that kind of software is available. So you can register the MRI which has been done for the patient previously, and wherever you are stimulating will be visible on your computer screen. So if I'm stimulating here, so it will be visible. Okay, this is the area got stimulated. So I will look for that particular movement. I will look for, let's say, limb movement, thumb movement, or hand movement. So as per the area being stimulated. Pyramidal neuronal activation and subsequent movements of the relevant contralateral muscular group, as I told you, can be observed or detected by the EMG, as I told you. Now talking about diffusion tensor imaging. What is diffusion tensor imaging? And again, it is a very upcoming MRI technique where you are actually able to see the corticospinal tracts or any tracts, any fibers in the brain. So you can see this blue lines coming from your cortical areas, and these are the pyramidal tracts which are going and going, and this is the spinal cord. So that's how they appear. So this is the actual representation of your corticospinal tract. It is not a diagram, it is not a computerized thing. So actually you can then play with those corticospinal tract. You can rotate, you can see in all directions. You can do a 3D analysis of those corticospinal tract, if it is being compressed by the tumor, or if it is being let's say cut by a hemorrhage, if it is being cut by a hemorrhage. So all those things you are able to see in this particular technique. So it is called as DTI, diffusion tensor imaging. So how does diffusion tensor imaging works? So detailed description I will be telling in the radiology, neurosurgical radiology course, which we'll be conducting in coming few days. So diffusion tensor imaging shows the anatomical relationships of major white matter tracts relevant to the tumor surgery, as I explained. It yields information regarding structure and not function. You would not be able to know which function is affected, okay, but you would be able to know where it is interrupted. Your corticospinal tract, if it is interrupted, so you would be able to know. So information it provides is regarding the structure, not the function. So this is a MCQ. Intrinsic brain tumors are associated with significant edema, which can distort the DTI tractography locally. So as I told you, if there is a tumor here, it will shift the DTI tracts, the corticospinal tracts, to the opposite side. So this is just one example where it is showing the corticospinal tracts. You can have, so corticospinal tract form the projection fibers. So there are three types of fibers in the brain. The fibers are the white matter tracts, okay, white matter fibers. So there are projection fibers, there are commissural fibers which are crossing the two hemisphere, okay. Then there are the association fibers that are going from one gyri to other, one gyrus to other, one gyrus to other, one gyrus to other. So these are the association fiber. So projection, association, and commissural which are crossing. C for commissural, C for crossing. So these are the three kind of fiber tracks you will be coming across in this particular neurology and neurosurgical whenever you are doing study. Now talking about, so this till now we were talking about the pre-operative mapping, pre-operative assessment of the patient. Before surgery itself, a lot of things you will be able to determine what kind of deficit will be produced and how should I avoid the deficit in the patient. So this was pre-operative planning. Now coming on to intraoperative mapping. Intraoperatively, how will you try to find out the functions and try to avoid the deficits in the patient. So this is intraoperative mapping. Now techniques of intraoperative mapping are, first of all, you use a cortical stimulator. So this is a cortical stimulator. So you can see this is a bipolar cortical stimulator. it produces an electrical current which is, let's say, 1 milliampere. So you can have current between 0.5 milliampere to 8 milliamperes. So this is a MCQ. So this current, when you apply to the brain, so there will be some sort of stimulation which will happen. And these particular current waves are biphasic square waves. They are 60 hertz in frequency, 1 millisecond in duration. The current ranges for 1 to 8 or 0.5 to 8. Different books tell different values, but we are sure that 8 milliampere is the higher value. And stimulation using a bipolar electrode to the cortical surface for 2 seconds. So you stimulate for 2 seconds, and positive cortical sites are labeled with a sterile number paper, as I showed you in the earlier image. So you will label the areas which got stimulated as the functional areas, and you will avoid those areas in your surgery. And when you're excising the tumor at the base also, you will do subcortical stimulation. So this is the cortex, this is the cortex, this is the subcortex, below the cortex. Okay, so subcortical stimulation, when you are doing, again you will come across white matter tracts and fibers which will get stimulated when you are stimulating them with a stimulator. So again you will mark those areas and avoid those areas and stop your surgery if you perceive that lot of deficit will be created. So here you can see how neurosurgeons go about the operation. First we will get the MRI done. We found that there is a tumor which is very near to the central sulcus. So this is the central sulcus, and just anterior to it in the supplementary motor area, we have the tumor which is pressing upon the motor area also. So definitely this patient must be having some amount of weakness also. And then you will see the 3D diagram of the brain. So this can be generated by MRI images also. You will see what are the venous drainage, what are the veins around the tumor, whether any veins are inside the tumor. If let's say tumor is covered by a vein which is supplying this particular area, and during the excision of the tumor, I excise this vein, so I will get deficit related to this area. So that's why they say neurosurgery is very intricate, and you will really enjoy neurosurgery. So I hope all of you are following and enjoying this particular lecture and sharing my excitement. Okay. Now this is again a 3D model which is showing you showing you the DTI. So this is the DTI, the diffusion tensor images. This is the 3D model. This is this red color is the arcuate fasciculus. It is arc shaped. Okay, so this is carrying your speech data. So that's how these are the corticospinal tracts. Okay, this yellow one is the sensory tracts, the spinothalamic tract. So so when you are excising this particular tumor, you would try to avoid these tracts, right? Now talking about techniques of intraoperative mapping. How would you do? So I was telling you the whole idea and the whole concept behind these processes. And now the specific aspects, the motor mapping is done, as I told you, 0.5 milliampere start, and keep on increasing till you see a EMG activity or a twitch, muscle twitch. And EMG based method is better because a lesser amount of current is required. So rather than observing the patient to twitch by a higher amount of current, you will actually go with a lower amount of current and see the EMG pulses in your EMG machine. Okay. Then how do you do sensory mapping? So sensory mapping, obviously the patient should be always be awake. Okay. Motor mapping still can be done in GA and the patient being in light plane of anesthesia. But in sensory mapping, you want the patient to tell you whether he's feeling or not. So wherever the concept of feel is very subjective, feeling. So feeling comes here, you require the patient to be awake, very awake. And then it is done similarly within the post-central gyrus. Patients typically report dysesthesias. So they will, let's say they are feeling pins and needles in particular area. So you would come to know, yes, this is the area which is sensory area, which is supplying the patient's leg. and I should not touch this area, and I should halt my tumor excision. So that's how it is done. Now, talking about the subcortical mapping, as I told you in this particular figure, so this is the cortex and this is the subcortex below the cortex. So subcortical mapping also is done, and the instrument you use is a suction stimulator. So as I told you, this is a stimulator. Similar way, we have a suction to suck the blood, and it will have a wire going to this machine, and it will suck the blood also. It will keep on periodically stimulating the particular area of brain while you are excising the tumor. So you don't have to stop your surgery every time to stimulate the cortex. So that monitoring will be happening continuously. So whenever you are sucking the blood, the cortex is getting touched and getting stimulated. Your neurophysics guy will tell you, boss, this particular area is getting stimulated, so I'll halt my excision over there. So subcortical mapping is same stimulation parameters as for cortical mapping. It is done when the resection nears the corticospinal tract system and the somatosensory pathway. So subcortical stimulation can detect descending corticospinal fibers, that is the white matter tracts, which are below the cortex. Internal capsule, which is deep. Internal capsule is at least 2 to 3 centimeter, 4 centimeter depth from the cortical surface. Then cerebral peduncles. These are the peduncles which connect the cerebrum with the midbrain, and then thalamocortical somatosensory pathways. So all these areas, so this is thalamus and cortex. The pathways between thalamus and cortex also, if you are expecting some damage to that, you can use a subcortical mapping by using a subcortical suction, okay, suction stimulator. Now, techniques of intraoperative mapping, language. Now, language, as I told you, language has to be assessed. It is very important. So when you are assessing the language, you will stop all the sedation and before the dural opening, okay. You will assess the patient for orientation, and you will ask the patient to count. You will assess whether he is able to count or not. And then you will ask the patient to continue, keep on counting, and then you will stimulate different areas and assess the patient for speech arrest. Okay, so wherever speech arrest is identified, if he is counting 1, 2, 3, again he went for a speech arrest, let's say for 4 and 5, while you were touching a specific brain area. So you would know, okay, this brain area is actually related to the speech, so I should leave this area. So this is what is speech arrest. Now, you will also give patient some picture naming tasks. You will give him some standardized pictures and ask the patient to tell the names of those pictures, and you will assess the errors in the identifications of those pictures. And at least 2 out of 3 trials, if they are wrong, then again you will say that the area is under risk. I should stop the surgery, or I should change my direction of the surgery. Nature of the error, what kind of speech deficit you will record during the surgery. So a patient could have a semantic paraphasia. He could have a different word with a different meaning. So let's say if he wanted to say a peacock, but he is saying pigeon, okay, so he is saying a different word with a different meaning. So this kind of paraphasia is called a semantic paraphasia. So all these are again important MCQs. You should remember these. Then what is phonemic paraphasia? So the patient, while saying the word, is changing the word with a similar sounding non-word. So let's say if you tell him to say peacock, he will say cock. So it is a similar sounding word, but it is not meaningful. So this is called as phonemic. Phonemic, it sounds the same almost, but it is not actually a word. Then what is anomia? Anomia is not able to retrieve a known word. So let's say if he sees peacock, he will not able to say peacock. He will just stay silent. He is not able to retrieve the word out of his brain. Then what is perseveration? Perseveration is repeatedly answering same word. So let's say in the first picture he saw a peacock, so he will tell you peacock, okay. Second picture you showed him a pigeon, he will again tell peacock. If you again showed him a parrot, he will again say peacock. So this is called as perseveration. He will stick to the same word which he said as an answer to the first question. So this is called as perseveration. Again, an important MCQ. Now, for multilingual patients, let's say there are people who know English, they are knowing Tamil, and they are knowing Hindi. So the speech area for them is not the single area. It can have certain common areas. It can have certain new areas which are not common to these. So let's say this is area for English, this is area for Tamil, and this is area for Hindi. So that's how it works. So you have to map each language separately. So if you don't do that, you are just asking the all the questions in English. Then at the end of the surgery, he will come out to be as an Englishman, and he will forget his Hindi and his Tamil. Okay. So that's how you have to map all the three areas of the language he knows. Okay. You have to ask the question in all the three languages. Throughout the period of the tumor resection, the patient is asked to perform a double task. So for the age of our examination during the surgery, obviously our attention is more on the surgery, okay, and on the deficits that are being created. So continuously you'll ask him to do one motor activity and one speech activity. So he will be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and he will be doing a finger tap, or he will be doing a foot tap, okay. So if whatever area you want to test, so that will have keep on having continuously while you are excising the tumor. While you are excising the tumor, patient will be doing these tasks continuously. So that's how it happens. How will you test your vision? So as everybody knows that in case of visual deficits, you can have homonymous hemianopias. Okay. So let's say this is homonymous hemianopia. So how would you test before actually patient becomes half blind, before actually patient becomes hemianopic? So you will show the patient images which are diagonally placed. Okay. And the patient will tell you that he is able to see bright spots in the images. If you are touching the cortex which is related to the visual area, visual cortex, the patient will tell you, boss, I am seeing some bright images in the left half of the image. So that is your hint that you should stop the surgery over that particular area. So these particular bright spots are called as phosphenes. They are called as phosphenes, and they will be seen in the contralateral hemifield. So this all I would be teaching you in our class of neuro-ophthalmology, how you would be assessing the field defects of the patients, right? So if it is hemianopia homonymous, right-sided or left-sided, so this all will be taught in that class, how you will, why it is contralateral hemifields you need to see, okay? And similar way, you will also see in the subcortical stimulation also, when you are in the depth of the brain, you will again show these kind of pictures and look for the phosphenes. Now, how would you test spatial cognition? What is spatial cognition? Spatial cognition is your position in with respect to the space. So let's say if you close your eyes and I ask you to lift your hand or touch your nose. So without seeing that particular object, you are able to locate your own body image, and you are able to touch your nose without going here and there. You are precisely able to touch the tip of your nose. So this is called a spatial cognition. And also you are able to remember, okay, this is my room, this is my house, this is where is the shopping mall I want to go to. So this all forms a part of spatial cognition, okay? So if you are doing surgery of the right inferior parietal lobule and posterior temporal lobe, you should do this particular test for spatial cognition. This is called as line bisection test. Again, a important MCQ. You will ask the patient to bisect the midpoint of the line, okay? So if the patient's spatial cognition area, let's say parietal lobule and temporal lobe, are being excised on, patient will develop a deficit and he will bisect the line away from the midline. So he will not be able to see, he will, though he is seeing, but he will not be able to find out the midpoint of the line. So this kind of test will prevent hemi neglect. So patients with hemi neglect tend to neglect the opposite half of their body. So they would not comb the opposite half of their body. They will not wash face on that particular half of the body. So this hemi neglect happens if you damage right inferior parietal lobule and posterior temporal lobe. So these are the area which are important for spatial cognition. Now coming on to electrocorticography. So this particular technique is very important in epilepsy surgery. So it is very much like EEG. EEG is done with closed head over the scalp. You place electrodes. In this, you place electrodes over the cortex. You place numbered electrodes over the cortex. So you want to find which particular brain area is responsible for my epilepsy. So that's what you are trying to find out. So instead of probing each and every single area one by one and taking the time that will prolong the duration of the surgery, I'll put a large strip of electrodes which are connected to each other, and this strip will be connected to my machine, okay, electrocorticography machine, and it will tell me, okay, that particular area which is having waves of the epilepsy, okay, that lies in 20 and 21 area. It will tell me like that. So electrode leads are placed directly over the surgically exposed cortical surface. Needle shaped depth electrodes are also used. So in case the etiology is expected deep inside the brain, you can place needle shaped electrodes, depth electrodes also. Let's say you are operating on mesial temporal lobe structures like hippocampus. So mesial temporal epilepsy is one of the most common causes of surgical treatable epilepsy, MCQ. This is MCQ, and this will be taught in epilepsy surgery. So there will be class on epilepsy surgery. I'll be teaching you this particular aspect. Now talking about synchronized postsynaptic potential. So what happens is there is a group of neurons below this area. They will be having synchronized postsynaptic potential. They will be having some electrical currents which will be seen in this particular instrument. Okay. Now, ECOG monitoring can detect higher frequency EEG signals than those captured by non-invasive EEG. So this is the advantage of doing a ECOG, which is called as electrocorticography. ECOG monitoring, you can detect higher frequency. So even very high frequency currents, which are not detected by the regular EEG, will be like this. Okay. Regular EEG will be like this. So very high frequency currents can also be detected by the ECOG monitoring, and greater than 60 hertz, up to greater than 60 hertz can be detected. And recent studies have shown potential use of pathological high frequency oscillations as markers of underlying epileptogenic focus. So all those preparing for neurosurgery for institute exams, this is a very important MCQ point, where pathological high frequency oscillation currents are the most important markers for underlying epileptogenic focus. Again, I'll explain all these concepts in the epilepsy surgery class. Now, this was all about the neurosurgical concepts till now. Now we will be talking about anesthetic consideration. So you might be wondering how actually the patient is awake and she is actually smiling, and you are doing brain surgery. She is actually this lady. I think she is a female neurosurgeon. This particular picture I got from internet. So she is right now creating a burr hole over her head, and this lady is smiling. How is this possible? Appropriate. So the anesthetic consideration are these particular: appropriate patient selection. You should have right patient. Pre-operative psychological preparation. Patient should be prepared for this awake surgery. There should be good rapport between the patient and the anesthesiologist. Surgeon will be busy doing his surgery. He won't be talking to the patient. It is the anesthetist. It is the anesthetist who is standing here and who is talking. So there should be good rapport between the anesthetist and the patient. Anesthetist and the patient. The comfort in patient positioning. Patient should be comfortable in positioning. Appropriate scalp nerve block. So you can see that we have put a head immobilizer. It is like a pin, head pin, which has been put inside her skull, and still the patient is in no pain. So this is the magic of scalp nerve blocks. And then anesthesia agent. She is happy. She's probably having the best time of her life. What you have given her? What kind of anesthetic drug she has given her? Why she's so happy? And then anesthetic technique, what kind of techniques you use for her oxygenation, for monitoring BP. So all those techniques we will discuss. Appropriate intraoperative monitoring. So monitoring, I have covered everything till now. And then continuous team communication. So anesthetist, if he's seeing any problem in the patient's function, he should communicate with the neurosurgeon that time itself before the damage is done. Now, this is again a MCQ dense slide. So what are the long acting agents are used for scalp anesthesia? They are bupivacaine and ropivacaine. So they are used as long acting local anesthetic agents. Incision, if it is in frontal region, what kind of nerve block you will give? You will give a supraorbital nerve block. Incision, if it is in temporal region, what kind of nerve block you'll give? You will give a auriculotemporal nerve block. If the incision is extending posteriorly, what nerve block you'll give? You'll give greater and lesser occipital nerve block. So depending on which area you are operating, the corresponding nerve blocks you are giving. Sometimes you tend to, if your incision is large, you are having a long hours of surgery you are expecting, you can give a full all three nerve blocks altogether. You can give. What are the ideal anesthetic agents for awake craniotomy surgery? So what is the magic? Why is the patient happy? Why is the patient not in pain? Why is the patient not in anxiety? What are you giving to the patient? So you are giving ideal anesthetic agent. What is the feature of ideal anesthetic agent? So it permits rapid and seamless transition from sedated to state to alert state. So when you are actually creating burr holes, when you are incising the scalp, making the incision, so in those cases patient, it is ideal that he is sedated. Okay, if he is sedated, you will be able to do all these steps very easily. So you need the patient awake when you are over the cortex. Okay, so the anesthetist should be able to do this transition seamlessly. The patient should be sedated. Another 5 minutes, he should be awake once I stop the agent. Okay, so this is the ideal property I require. It should have a short half-life. It should have no epileptogenic action. Should not be that I am already stimulating the scalp, stimulating the cortex at multiple areas, and the anesthetic agent is already increase the epileptogenic potential of the neurons, and if I stimulate and patient gets an intraoperative seizure. So I don't want that. It should not interfere with the intraoperative mapping. So in my instruments, my neuromonitoring instruments, I am observing different parameters, different waves, that whether it is EMG, whether it is SSEP. So all these waves be should be visible. So the anesthetic agent or the paralyzing in GA we are giving paralyzing agent. So obviously in presence of a paralyzing agent, you will not be able to see EMG recording because the muscles will be paralyzed. So that's where you have to use kind of anesthetic agent which will enable you to do intraoperative mapping. Now, these are the anesthetic agents. This is again a MCQ. And what kind of anesthetic agents are used for awake craniotomy? So it is propofol, fentanyl, and remifentanil, and dexmedetomidine. So they have their own properties. Propofol, it is a good sedative, good hypnotic, good antiemetic agents. It decreases the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen so that the neurons are suppressed, the epileptogenic potential is suppressed. the ICP is reduced, and there is rapid recovery with clear-headedness. So if my incision is done and I would ask the anesthetist to stop the propofol, patient will be wide awake and conscious, cooperative, oriented for my neurological testing during the surgery. Fentanyl and remifentanil. So they are again ultra short acting opioid analgesics. No, they are the opioids. So patient is very happy. So this is why the patient is very happy. He's getting opioids. Okay. And then for talking about dexmedetomidine. So it is a alpha 2 receptor agonist. It is an anxiolytic. So no anxiety. It is a sedative, and there is also pain relief analgesia. It does not causes respiratory depression. So there will be no tongue fall. There will be no tongue fall. There will be no requirement for intubation in between the surgery. So dexmedetomidine will help. So anesthetists usually give these in combinations, in some or the other combinations. So they are the best ones to tell you what combinations and all. But for neurosurgeons purpose, these are all the points which you should know. Now, what are the anesthetic techniques of awake craniotomy? So you have asleep, awake, asleep technique. So when the patient incision is being given, when you are making a burr hole, okay. So on all those cases, you will keep the patient asleep. And when you are actually stimulating the cortex, you are stimulating the cortex, you will make the patient awake. So it is the asleep, awake, and asleep technique. So once you are done with your surgery, you are just closing and suturing the incision. You don't need the patient awake. So again, you will make the patient asleep. So this is the first technique. Second technique is awake, awake, awake technique. So during the whole course of surgery, the patient is awake, only mildly sedated, but he is listening to everything and he is responding to everything. So this is the second technique, awake, awake, awake technique. So these again, as I told you, these are also MCQs. Now, how would you monitor the depth of anesthesia? So because when you're giving propofol, when you're giving opioids, when you're giving dexmedetomidine, okay, how much dose you should give? So let's say the patient is not is very heavy, or his metabolism is slow. So you never know what dose will affect and will cause how much depression in the consciousness. So that's why we need these particular instruments. They are again high-end technology, which is only available in very few hospitals in India. So they will tell you that's the monitor. It will tell you what is the patient's consciousness. So it will give you a number, 40%, 60%, it will give you a number, and you will come to know that whether patient is awake or whether patient is asleep, and how much awake and how much asleep and how much time it will take for the patient to become awake. So all this can be controlled right there inside the operation theater by the anesthetist using this particular instruments, which is bispectral index. It is called as BIS monitoring. BIS monitoring uses EEG data. So on the patient's head, I will put three leads. I will put three leads, interconnected leads, which are connected to a instrument, which tell me what is the depth of anesthesia of the patient. So number between 0, that is absence of brain electrical activity, and 100 is wide awake. So 40 to 60 value is asleep phase, and more than 85 patient is awake. Okay. So that's how you can very precisely control the depth of anesthesia. Similar concept is entropy monitoring by another company. So this entropy monitoring uses both EEG and FEMG data. So frontal EMG. So if your EEG is the same concept of this particular BIS monitoring, but additionally it has got EMG data also, that helps that if you are stimulating the motor area, whether the patient will get stimulated, whether EMG is will be stimulating, or whether the patient will be having twitch or not. this would be told by this parameter FEMG data. Okay, so it produces two numbers. One is response entropy and one is state entropy. So state entropy will tell you the depth of anesthesia, and response entropy will tell you whether the patient will twitch or whether the EMG will be visible or not. So now I'm ending this particular presentation with a very brief take home message. And these are all carry home messages, and they are very important MCQs. So maximum safe resection is redefined from flare-based lesionotomy approaches to supratotal resection approach in glioma surgery. So this is the keyword. This is the MCQ. So you have to aim for supratotal resection in glioma surgery for low recurrence and better performance, and supratotal resection has to be done using awake craniotomy technique, because the deficits, post-operative deficits, can be prevented by awake craniotomy technique. Pre-operative planning integrated with intraoperative awake mapping to achieve supratotal resection with minimum function loss. So this is the crux of neurosurgery. You have to take lot of risk, but with minimal deficit. The patient who has gone with a certain amount of deficit, he should come out of the surgery with same amount of deficit. You should not, your surgery should not increase the deficit. That is the purpose of neurosurgery. You should be able to prevent the deficit from happening so that the neurosurgery is safe. Now coming on to ECOG. ECOG, this is the keyword, PHFOs. So ECOG, you detect PHFOs, that is pathological high frequency oscillations in epilepsy surgery. That they tell you the areas which are responsible for your epilepsy, the structural areas which are responsible for epilepsy, and you need to excise those. Then the techniques of intraoperative mapping for various modalities. I told you about motor, sensory, language, visual, spatial. So anything can be asked. And then anesthesia techniques. What are the anesthesia techniques for awake craniotomy? They are asleep, awake, asleep technique, and awake, awake, awake technique. Then anesthesia agents. What are the anesthesia agents? Propofol and remifentanil and dexmedetomidine. What is the depth of anesthesia monitoring? It is BIS monitoring and entropy monitoring. So hereby I end my presentation, and if anybody has any questions, you can please shoot. I'll be waiting. Is there anybody from Search Test on the call?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you can maybe see in the chat if somebody has any questions.
Yes, sir.
So I guess somebody has asked, kindly give a brief program on the brief on the program. How long will be the session? So sessions will be usually from 6 to 9 p.m. And they will be subject to my availability. I am planning to conduct classes every alternate days, but there are certain days if I get some emergency calls for surgery, so I may have to miss that particular session. So that will be informed to you on our WhatsApp group. And the fees and details, the brochure is available. You can ask the Search Test team for the same. And any other questions related to the topics, you can shoot now. So I assume that this session was helpful for you. Tentative classes will be over in 1 month. Yeah, I am planning to do 12 sessions of 12 sessions, 3 hours of each class. And if there is certain areas which are left, I will be also conducting some extra classes to cover. So I am planning to give you at least 80 to 90% coverage of the whole neurosurgery. There may be a very few unimportant areas which are not covered, and it is not possible to cover everything in live classes. So we'll be updating you with the notes, materials, MCQs, and also regular videos. These videos obviously will be available on Search Test, but apart from that, there will be some other videos also which will be made available in case certain areas are missed in the live sessions. And if you have certain doubts regarding any particular area which you are finding it difficult to learn by yourself, you can definitely ask me and I can go ahead and conduct an extra class, and we can upload that lecture also on the Search-Test website and Search-Test app. Yeah, the MCQs will be provided separately. So this live classes, I am planning to build concept in neurosurgery. I am not planning you to cram through neurosurgery points. I want you to build concepts so that you are able to answer questions of AIIMS neurosurgery, JIPMER neurosurgery, which are totally conceptual, and they expect you to have knowledge of a third year neurosurgery resident. You must have seen the neurosurgery question paper of this year. Only 3 candidates were actually selected, and very few candidates actually qualified. So that is the level of the exam. So you have to think like a neurosurgeon for answering the MCQs correctly. So I will right now not lay stress over MCQs during these live classes. I'll be telling you each and every slide, these are the important MCQs, and then we will be sharing the PDF format of those slides so that you can study the next day or the same day, and the next class, maybe one of you, if you want, we can have an interactive session also. So MCQs will be provided later once these live classes are over. So there'll be a gap of maybe 15 to 20 days, after which the MCQs will be provided. Okay, great. Any other questions, please? So Search-Test team, should we end this session now?
Yes, sir. We can.
Okay. Thank you everybody for the patient listening. I hope I was clear and loud, and I was able to give give you enough information so that you found this session helpful. If you have any feedback for my teaching, and if you want some changes in my teaching style, you can very well contact the Search-Test team and give the comments, whatever you need. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye for today.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.